So welcome everyone. Tonight our speaker is Allen Giese. Allen is the author of a book, When Mental Health Illness Strikes, Crisis Intervention for the Financial Plan, and it's available on Amazon. A chartered financial consultant and chartered special needs consultant, Allen is the founding partner and CEO of North Star Financial Planners, a wealth management firm and registered investment advisory firm managing over $225 million in client assets in Plantation, Florida. As a father of an adult son with a serious mental illness, Allen and his wife, Gail, have worked tirelessly to advocate on behalf of those with serious mental illness. In 2015, he founded Ride to Awareness, a 501c3 nonprofit that raised awareness to the stigma attached to having a mental illness. Allen and about half of a dozen other bicyclists rode nearly 3,000 miles to San Diego, California to St. Augustine, Florida, working with NAMI and MHA chapters along the way, raising funds and awareness across the country. Both Allen and Gail devote many hours to NAMI and advocating on behalf of those with mental illness. Allen is currently the board president of NAMI Broward, while Gail is founding member and president of Florida Mental Health Advocacy Coalition, as well as director of the NAMI Florida board. Both Allen and Gail were also honored in 2019 as recipients of Mental Health America's EPIC Award. As you'll discover in this evening's talk, Allen is passionate about helping families who have been stricken by serious mental illness make better financial decisions and improve their lives. Thank you very much, Allen, for joining us tonight.
Well, thank you for that. I am excited about being here with this audience in particular. I mean, you guys are right down the street from us up here in Broward. And ever since that first family-to-family class that I took, gosh, it was probably 12 years ago, all NAMIs have had just such a special place, you know, in our hearts. So let me start off with a little story. So one day, my wife, Gail, was out of town and my son had his regular doctor's appointment that day. So it was up to me to take him. He was working with the FAT team up here in Broward. And so I swung by the house from the office to pick him up, and he just wasn't doing very well. He was a little agitated. Doctor's office was probably 20 minutes away in the car. And in that 20-minute car ride, he really went from bad to worse. He didn't want to go. He was complaining about it, no uncertain terms. And when we got there, as I'm parking the car, I mean, I hadn't even stopped the car yet, and he jumps out and makes a beeline to the front door of this office building where the FAC team is located. Well, they buzz him in because, you know, they don't know that, you know, he's having a hard time. And what he did next, I don't think anybody in the office there was really expecting, because he sort of makes a beeline right for his doctor's office door, which was closed. And he starts pounding on it and yelling at the top of his lungs about what he felt about her right then and there. And it wasn't nice. Then he turns and leaves. And so about that time, I finally get to the office building myself, and he's coming out just as I'm going in. So as he's walking out, well, first off, he's definitely in crisis at this point. There's no question about it. And he's ranting, and he's raving, and he's yelling, and I'm following him, just trying to calm him down. But what I don't see happening is behind me, a Broward sheriff's officer is coming out of the building. And, you know, he wants to know what all the commotion's about, I'm sure. And so he's probably maybe 15, 20 yards behind us at this moment. And Andrew finally turns around and sees me, but then he sees, you know, over my shoulder, this deputy, and he immediately knows he's about to get Baker acted. And so he approaches the deputy, and he's still in a rage, and he's yelling, but he's saying, I've been good. I've been taking my meds. I don't understand what's wrong with the world. Everything's against me. He's looking really menacing. And, you know, he's like 6 feet tall. He's 200 pounds. He doesn't have a violent bone in his body, but I don't know if the officer knew that. I certainly didn't know if the officer knew that. So anyway, as he's approaching the officer, I see two things. First, I see this. I see that CIT pin on his lapel because I've been trained to look for it. You know, a lot of us have been trained to look for it. And second, I see this officer take half a step back off the path as my son's approaching him. And I also see him instinctively just put his hand down on his belt right next to his revolver. But my son walks right past him and nothing happened. It's like that was one cool cucumber, this officer. And that is the best anticlimactic outcome to that story possible. And you can imagine what could have easily happened in that situation. It could have easily gone a different direction. And we all know why in that situation, which could have been a disaster or even tragic. We know why it wasn't, right? It's because that officer was well-trained in crisis intervention team training. Had he relied only on his traditional policing technique, we all know that that story could very well have ended very differently. So the reason that I tell you that story is because there is a parallel. There is a parallel here with traditional or with financial planning, believe it or not. Here it is. Traditional financial planning isn't enough to deal with the issues that we all in this room have and have to deal with. We need more. We need a better understanding, excuse me, of the situation. We need our advisors, whether they're financial or legal or tax, to have a higher level of understanding of the nuances to Social Security and Medicaid planning and special needs trusts and ABLE accounts, for example. And with the traditional financial advisor or with the financial advisor, we need a planner who isn't paid like traditional planners are. One of my biggest gripes about our industry is that, and this applies whether it's special needs or not, is that it's based on transactions. The planner, in most cases, is really just a glorified salesperson selling some sort of financial product or products. Just follow the money and it becomes crystal clear. How does that planner get paid? And I know this because I used to be this many years ago. So what I want to do today is I want to show you, let's call it like a CIT perspective on financial planning for families who have a family member with a serious mental illness. Because ever since my son was diagnosed with schizophrenia about 13 years ago, my wife and I have learned the hard way how his illness affected our family's finances, our estate planning, and basically just our future financial security. And because of my family's experience and my well over 30 years as a financial planner, my passion is helping families who have been stricken by a serious mental illness make better decisions with their finances and achieve what's most important to them. So in the next 35 to 40 minutes, I'd like to focus on three things. First, let's look at why financial planning is different for most families with mental illness. What makes us different and unique, even when you compare us to most others in the special needs community who have developmental disabilities. Second, let's take a high-level view of the strategies and the concepts that you just have to be aware of, the things that they have to be on your radar. And then third, I'm going to show you a systematic approach to planning for parents of adult children with mental illness, because generally speaking, that's most of the cases. And it's a systematic process that we've been using for years that adapts. It stays current with changes as your family continues to change over the years. At the end, I'm going to leave about 10 to 12 minutes or so for questions. We've already gotten quite a few questions in. Put more in the chat if you have them as we go, and I'll make sure we get to those at the end. If we run out of time, I will hang out at the end and answer whatever questions we couldn't get to. Okay, so let's get on to the first section here. A client of mine has a daughter she's on the autism spectrum, and they learned early that she and they were going to face some pretty significant challenges for a pretty long time. So early on, they sought out and they got a lot of help and assistance, much of which is mandated by the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. For example, coordinating with the public school system, they created an individualized education plan, or an IEP, assuring that their daughter was given every opportunity to get as high a quality an education as possible given her disability. And then as she approached adulthood, they worked together with the school to form a transition plan into adulthood. Now, again, all of this is required by law because of IDEA. As their daughter got older, they all gradually have now learned how to make the most of things and how to make the very best possible life for their daughter and for their family. And my point through all of this is that they've had years to do this. Now contrast that with the typical family, if there is such a thing, whose son or daughter has schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. And we'll use my example or my experience as an example. We, at the time, were doing college tours about the same time our son had his first crisis. Financially, at that time, before his first crisis, we had two big financial concerns. First, how were we going to pay for these schools that we were looking at? And second, how do we do that without diverting away from our own retirement? Because that's down the road and we need to plan for that as well. And that was it. Those were our biggest financial concerns. And then wham, our son's in mental health crisis, and we're basically looking at stage 4 of a serious illness. So one of the things that really makes our families unique from most other special needs families is that this thing typically blindsides us much later. Typically, mom and dad are in their 40s, maybe their 50s. They're thinking about things like college funding and how they're going to focus on their retirement plan so that maybe they can stop working one day. And then out of the blue comes this. So now what's the mode that mom and dad are in? Well, they're in like, we got to fix this mode. In our case, one of our objectives was getting him as much therapy as possible so that he could learn some coping mechanisms for the tremendous amount of anxiety that he was experiencing and has since. And the cost, the reality was we weren't concerned whether or not it was covered in a health plan. It just didn't matter. We were in crisis mode. And we thought if there was a chance it would make him better, we'll pay for it without hesitation. And I've seen a lot of families go through that same scenario. We don't have time to acclimate ourselves to the idea that we may have to deal with this for a long, long time. Nobody's coming up to us and saying, hey, there's this federal law that requires you to get services for this, because there isn't one. Most of us don't even know what it is that we're dealing with for months or sometimes even years while this disease, this serious mental illness, while it manifests itself. It takes a long time for it to manifest. But unfortunately, for many of us, the realization, it eventually sets in that this is something that we're going to have to deal with, and it's going to be a part of our lives for a long time, maybe the rest of our lives. So the age of onset is something that really sets us apart. But something else that makes us unique from most other developmental disabilities is the out-of-pocket costs. We all know that insurance parity is a really big issue right now, and how much organizations like NAMI and Florida Mental Health Advocates Coalition have focused on various health plans and how they deal with mental illness costs and making sure that those plans cover mental health equally. It's getting a little bit better, but there's a long way to go. In our case, when I think back to where we were a dozen years ago or so, I can't even begin to tell you how many of those therapy appointments we paid for just out of pocket, or that time that we flew to Vancouver to see the specialist that had a really promising treatment program that basically just ended up costing us thousands and thousands of dollars. So I'm working with a client recently on a Zoom meeting. It's actually not her. That's I wouldn't put her up there, but for the slide I put it's Stacy Saavedra. She's our director of client services at North Star. So anyway, this client's daughter has schizophrenia, and they live about halfway up the state or so on the East Coast. And we're in a planning meeting one day over Zoom, and I said to her, "Hey, tell me what is your biggest concern? Like, what's that thing that worries you more than anything else, above everything else?" And probably half of you know what it is that she said. She said, "Allen, it is wondering who's going to take care of my kid when I'm gone." And that's it. She wasn't just talking about who's going to make sure that she takes her meds and has groceries. She was talking about who's going to be there for her, to advocate for her, to do all the little things that I know you do, just like we do for our son. And that is the big question. So early on, when I decided to divert my attention and focus my passion on helping families the best way that I could, I needed to know more about what families were doing and dealing with than just my own personal experience. So I ended up doing this study, which was actually the very beginning of my book, where I interviewed dozens of families and parents and professionals that work with families and asked them, what are your biggest concerns? What are the biggest concerns these families have? I asked them what they fear the most. I asked them if they were getting the help that they needed, and are they being successful at overcoming those concerns? And what that client said to me that day was basically the culmination of everything that we learned. It's that if we can help solve that problem or make advancements, at least make advancements towards who's going to take care of our kids when we're gone, then that's the work we want to be doing. So everything that we do is about how that's going to ultimately happen and how we can position the family's financial plan as favorably as possible toward that end. So what are some of the things that we need to be focused on? What needs to be on our radar? And what are the tools that we have to deal with? So early on when we were trying to better understand what was going on with our son and how to deal with everything, my wife was in a support group led by someone who has since become just a wonderful friend. I think probably half of you know her, if not all of you, and I don't think she'd mind if I called her out. It's Marilyn Lieberman, who has sort of been an icon in the mental health community in Miami-Dade. So in the group one day, they were talking about Social Security, and my wife Gail mentioned that we didn't think that we would qualify for any sort of benefits. And after a whole lot of discussion, Marilyn, who I think was kind of probably exasperated at this point, just basically said to her, just apply, you'll thank me later. You see, like most people out there, we had a pretty basic understanding of Social Security, but almost entirely from a retirement perspective, like when do you start it and what are the advantages for waiting and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I'd certainly heard of SSDI and even SSI, but I'd have been pretty hard pressed to explain what the differences were or any intricacies of how either program worked. And Medicaid or Medicare, forget it. I didn't know anything about it. I knew they existed, and that's basically it. Well, we applied, and wow, I mean, I couldn't believe it. They actually started sending my son or dropping it into his checking account every month, a check. And they even sent him a pretty significant check for a whole bunch of months in arrears. And we couldn't believe it. I mean, Marilyn was right. So I guess it's later. So if Marilyn were on this call, I'd be saying, thank you, Marilyn. You made a difference. Today, I certainly know a whole lot more about Social Security and SSI and SSDI than I did back then. But I got to confess something to you. It's still pretty confusing. There are a lot of intricacies and rules, and I'll be the first to admit it's not easy. And there's been some things that we've learned that have been kind of surprising. For example, and I'm sure a lot of you know this, but when I found out, I was blown away. When I first learned that if your child was diagnosed before age 22 and is on SSI now, but you as a parent decide to start taking Social Security retirement benefits at full retirement age, your child then qualifies for half of your retirement benefit. I mean, that's pretty important for parents to understand when it comes time to take retirement, and it's going to help people decide on whether or not they should delay the retirement benefits to age 70 or not. When you've got that big a carrot hanging in front of you for maybe you should take it now. What else? If I pay my son's rent through his special needs trust, that is considered an in-kind support benefit. And it's in-kind support and maintenance is actually the Social Security term. And it'll decrease his SSI check that month, dollar for dollar, up to $300. But I can pay for his rent through his ABLE account, and that won't matter. That won't ding his SSI check. Makes that pretty easy to figure out. I'll make sure we've got enough in the ABLE account to cover his rent check. Or that the first $85, a lot of stuff you read, it makes it sound like it's only $20 of earned income that my son makes in a month, doesn't count as income for Social Security purposes. So it doesn't ding his SSI. And that for each dollar after that, it only dings his SSI check by 50 cents until eventually it's all gone. But it's a wonderful incentive for him to still earn money. Social Security's got a lot of confusing stuff going on there. But perhaps the most important thing about Social Security that I've learned is that the most valuable aspect for qualifying for SSI may not necessarily be that monthly disability check. Certainly helps, but it's the automatic acceptance here in Florida into the Medicaid program. That's the big difference maker right there. I don't think it's still true, but I think in years past, like the FACT team, which was a huge thing for us and under Andrew's treatment program, was funded through Medicaid. You know, obviously the health insurance benefits are huge as well. So you couple all that with the SSI income, and I'm pretty sure that's what Marilyn was talking about when she said just apply, and we get it now. It makes sense. Another story. So one day I'm working on a client's plan and this little thunderbolt hits me. So, let me back up a little bit. This client is a longtime client. They've been with me for probably over 25 years. And I really like this client. And I'll tell you why. It's because he's just like me. He is the same age. His family's the same size. Our kids are the same ages. He makes the same income I do, and he has roughly the same level of assets that I have. I mean, it's like looking at him in the mirror, except for I think I'm better looking, but that doesn't really apply in this story. So here's the point that this is where the lightning bolt hit me. I'm focusing on his retirement plan that day, and I'm thinking to myself, hey, Alan, pay attention because this is your plan. This is the same math because everything else is the same. Until I realized it's not. His daughter, who is the same age as my son, she doesn't have schizophrenia. She's not on SSI and Medicaid. And that's when it really hit me hard, that their retirement plan is for two people, him and his wife. And our retirement plan is for three people. But one of them is a whole generation younger with what we really hope to be and certainly want to plan for it being a really long life expectancy. And in addition, one of them has a whole set of special rules that we have to contend with. So let me ask you this. How much more efficient does my money have to work than his? How much longer does it have to last for us? And how much more complex does the planning have to be because of things like government benefits and special needs trusts? Well, the answer is a lot. I can't afford a mistake. I can't afford excess expenses and expensive investment product, like, and God forbid, inefficient investment strategies or structuring something in a way that puts my son's benefits in jeopardy. I can't afford to have an investment plan that doesn't do a good job of beating inflation, eroding every dollar. Another client I'm working with that we've been doing a lot of meetings over a year's time, because she'd been sold, and I really stress that term, sold, for annuities whose place just has no purpose in her plan. And to start with, the annuities are extremely inefficient investment products, generally speaking. It's because they typically come along with really high commissions to sales agents that sell them and high internal fees to the insurance companies that make them. And much of which doesn't even have to be disclosed to the client in many forms of annuities. But in addition to that, the reason that those annuities were such a bad idea for this client goes back to that question of who's going to take care of my kid when I'm gone. Those annuities weren't focused on that goal, but she's in them, and the cost to get out of them is excessively high. So now our job is to figure out what's the best way that we can put some, I'm going to use a down-home term, put some lipstick on a pig and focus those assets as best as we can on benefiting her daughter one day. I'm not going to get into it here today because it's complicated, involved a tremendous amount of work, and we don't have time, but it was clear that the previous planner, and this is my point, I don't want to even call him a planner, he's really a life insurance salesman, clearly had no idea the damage that he was causing her with the placement of those annuities. It's crisis intervention team training. He did not have it. He didn't understand what truly was important to that client. And there's no way he was acting as a fiduciary and putting her needs above his own with the sale of those annuities. And here's where I see traditional planners doing the most harm, trying to apply these expensive investment and insurance products like broker sold annuities, the wrong kinds of life insurance, high cost, high expense retail mutual funds, just like they would use for anyone else, because they're doing what they've been trained. And don't get me wrong, they mean well, just like the police officer who hasn't gone through CIT training. He or she thinks they're doing the best job. It's doing the job they've been trained to do, that they're doing it correctly. They just don't know better. And they don't know that there are better ways. And they're just, if you could put it in a word, they're just naive. So I've been doing this for a really long time. And here's what I've learned about this in all of my years of this in this profession. It's my opinion that you are not going to get the best advice from somebody who gets paid by somebody else for selling you an investment or an insurance product. I think that's probably the most important thing that I can tell you if you're seeking help and if you're seeking a highly efficient plan. So what ways does a good advisor who's not selling expensive investment products, how do they make your investment plan more efficient so that you have a higher probability of accomplishing these important goals that you have, like making your money last longer than your kids? It's by focusing on evidence-based investment strategies, using low-cost institutional investments, basically not doing what the Wall Street companies teach advisors about how to sell large amounts of investment products, but instead by focusing on what academic thought leaders on modern portfolio theory, like this guy on the left is Gene Fama at the University of Chicago, won a Nobel Prize in 2013, I think, and Ken French, he partners with on a lot of papers at Dartmouth. It's what these guys say on what the most efficient methods are for capturing global capital market rates of return against any level of risk, whether it's conservative or aggressive. It's a very different story what the academics say versus what the Wall Street firms say. And it makes sense because the university professor, he's not trying to sell you anything. He just wants to know how it works and what's the most efficient way to make it work. All right, so that's all I'm going to say about that. Let's talk about special needs trusts, because you can't have one of these talks and not talk about special needs trusts. I'm guessing that the likelihood is pretty high that many of you in this Zoom room tonight have some familiarity with special needs trusts. But just in case, for those that don't, a special needs trust, it's a trust that's designed to provide resources to someone who is receiving or might receive in the future SSI or Medicaid benefits. And you don't want to jeopardize those benefits by violating the resource limits that are imposed by Social Security and Medicaid. So there's 3 types of special needs trusts out there. And forgot to mention that we're going to be we're at 30,000 feet looking down on this. We're not going to get into the weeds tonight. So there's 3 types of special needs trusts: third-party trusts, which are funded with other people's money; self-funded, or sometimes they're called first-party trusts, which are funded with the disabled person's own assets. And I'll give you a couple examples in a minute. And then there are pooled trusts, which pool your assets along with other people who are in similar situations. And they allow you to sort of tag on to an already existing trust that has its own money management and its own trust administration. So like I said, there's a lot that we can talk about with special needs trusts. It's a whole, I've sat through 3 and 4 hour seminars on just special needs trusts. And so if there's any place that we can get stuck in the weeds this evening and dive into deep, it's right here. So I'm going to keep it fairly brief and very big picture tonight. And let's just talk about why you might need a special needs trust and what you should do next if you think you do need a trust or you might need a trust. So it's all about assets, all right? The whole idea behind special needs trusts is to protect someone who has too much assets and is going to violate the SSI and the Medicaid resource limit of $2,000. If they have more than that, they're going to get disqualified and they won't be able to continue to receive their SSI check and receive Medicaid until they're back under that $2,000 limit. All right, so case in point, Linda, we'll call her Linda. She's on SSI, all right? Linda has very little assets. She's the disabled person. Now, it's okay for her to have a home. She can live in a home and own it. She can have a car. She can have 2 cars. She can have a few other minor things. But if the Social Security Administration figures out, and they will, if Linda ever has more than $2,000 in cash or investments, then she's going to get cut off and she's going to lose her SSI that month and going forward until she gets back under 2,000. And that would not be good. Unbeknownst to Linda, her grandma has her in the will. And unfortunately, grandma just died. So Linda ends up inheriting $50,000. Well, guess what? Linda just lost her SSI until she spends down that $50,000. In steps a special needs trust. All right, so if Linda had a third-party special needs trust already set up and grandma designated the trust as the beneficiary, not Linda, then Linda's trust gets the $50,000 and Linda gets to keep her SSI and Medicaid. Now Linda's trust can supplement Linda's needs, and basically Linda gets both SSI and the benefit of the $50,000. That's a third-party trust. It was funded with grandma's money, other people's money. So another case, let's use Linda again. Let's say Linda's not disabled now, but she ends up getting in a car accident, after which she becomes permanently disabled. And at that point can qualify for Social Security benefits. So Linda has an outstanding lawyer who ends up suing the heck out of the insurance company for the other driver and ends up winning a big award check for Linda. But now Linda can't qualify for SSI anymore because that big check violates the SSI resource limit. So Linda's lawyer at the same time sets up a first-party special needs trust, and that's where the check goes. And now Linda can qualify for SSI. It's Linda's money which funds the trust, but she gets it out of SSI's perspective by putting it into the first-party special needs trust. So there's 2 things that are going on here. One is assets, is having enough assets or the expectation that you're going to have enough assets to violate the resource limit. The other is having SSI or Medicaid, both of which have resource limits. I mean, if you're disabled and you have SSDI, which you have to qualify for SSDI by having a work history, it's really not a problem because SSDI does not have a resource limit. You can have $100,000 in the bank and still get an SSDI check if you medically qualify for disability under SSDI. And if you've paid into Social Security long enough to be eligible for this benefit. Same with Medicare. So assets and SSI or Medicaid. If the answer is yes to the questions, do you have more than $2,000 or will you have more than $2,000? And are you receiving SSI or Medicaid? Then maybe a special needs trust is something you should consider. Okay, so now what? You need to talk to somebody who knows more about this stuff than you do. And at some point, you need to talk to an attorney who is well-versed in these kinds of trusts, because it's not the same as the revocable trust that everybody gets. And it's basically, which is basically just 90% boilerplate anyway, that basically any attorney can write and probably get away with it. Don't go to the guy that did your last real estate closing. He's going to say that he knows what he's doing, but he doesn't. I've been down that road too many times. Personally, I have found that attorneys that are highly credentialed in elder law are a great place to start. You can go online, Martindale Hubbell, martindale.com, I think it is, or just Google Martindale Hubbell. Is a wonderful referral source for attorneys. And in the search bar, type in elder law attorneys, and you're going to start, there's not a lot of them. I think there's under 200 in the state of Florida, but you know how many attorneys are in Florida, but only 200 have elder law certifications. And also you might want to look for those that are nationally certified, not state certified. Nationally certified requires a significant amount of testing. You have to prove it. State certification basically requires a fee and some experience, but it's mostly just based around a fee. That's what I'm told by my attorney's friends. I hope that's right. So elder law attorneys are a great place to start. The reason is that they know the specific language that has to be in a special needs trust for it to qualify and offer and give you that protection that you're depending on it for. Okay, so that's enough on special needs trusts. Let's move on to able accounts, which is kind of the other thing you have to talk about in all these talks, right? You have to talk about special needs trusts, you have to talk about able accounts. And again, I'm going to keep this kind of simple. That's my motto tonight. This is the KISS method. Keep it simple, sailor, we'll call it. Okay. So these things came out in like 2014. I think that's when legislation first occurred. It took a couple of years for the states to kind of figure them out and produce product that we could actually invest in. And so it really wasn't until 2016 until we saw the first one. So they really haven't been around very long. And because they're still kind of new, I still find a lot of people have never heard of them. So an able account is kind of like a special needs trust in only one respect, and that it allows the account holder to remain eligible for SSI or Medicaid, because the money that's in an able account doesn't qualify or doesn't count against the resource limit for those programs up to a point. And the point is $100,000. That's the max that you can have in an able account before it starts counting against the resource limit. So here's what an able account does. You or basically anybody can put up to $16,000 per year into an able account for a designated beneficiary who is disabled and can show that they were disabled prior to the age of 26. That means onset prior to the age of 26. It doesn't mean you can't open an able account if they're 30 or if you're 30. It means that you have to have the onset of the disability before the age of 26. The money that's in the able account grows tax-free, which is kind of cool, and can be used only for the beneficiary's benefit for qualified disability expenses like education or food or housing or transportation, and the list goes on. It is not hard to find a reason it's okay to spend the money. Now, ABLE accounts came out using 529 college savings programs sort of as their chassis, like as they use that like as their, that's how they didn't want to redesign something from the ground up, so they just took 529 plans and said, let's follow this. So there's a ton of similarities with 529 plans and ABLE accounts, and a lot of people are familiar with 529 plans. They're state run. Not all 50 states have 529 plans, but I think actually we're up to like 49 at this point, which is, again, pretty cool. The variations between state plans are basically like who the money managers are, and some minor differences, like if a person from outside the state can participate in a different state's plan or not. So what are the pros and cons of an ABLE account? For starters, they're pretty easy to understand, which goes a long way to getting people, I think, to utilize them. Tax deferred savings, always a good thing. I mean, who doesn't want to put their money aside and have it grow on a tax-free basis and then use it without having to pay taxes on any of their earnings? That's a tremendous advantage. The ability to remain eligible or qualify for SSI and Medicaid, well, that's kind of a no-brainer, right? And this is the whole purpose of the ABLE account, is to have a way to save and not jeopardize benefits. And for a number of people that I know, it's been a great way for them to save some money and personally remain qualified for SSI, but still feel like there's a contribution that they're making to the world. And I know that's something that really bothers my son, not knowing or not feeling like he's able to even work. So there's a lot of benefits going on there psychologically as well. One of the drawbacks is that, and it goes back to the 529 plan structure, is that you can only put $16,000 in per year. And that's from all sources. So it's actually based on the gift tax limit, which does change a little from time to time. Like this year, I think it went up $1,000 for 22. So, even if you are able to max it out each year, or grandma or mom or dad max it out, and even if you didn't spend any of it and just let it grow, it's going to take a few years before you get close to that $100,000 limit, or before that 100,000 becomes an issue. But you'll get there eventually. By the way, there is a way to put a little bit more into an ABLE than that 16,000. And that's if and only if the beneficiary hasn't made any contributions to a retirement plan during the year and has earned income up to $5,000. Then they can put dollar for dollar whatever their earned income is up to that $5,000. So in other words, if the beneficiary is earning at least $5,000, they can put all the way up to $21,000 into the plan from all sources. All right, I've never understood up until recently, we haven't seen legislation that changes that onset at prior to age 26 rule, because from the beginning that just made no sense at all, other than, well, that's what college savings plans have. It started that way because of 529 plans, and honestly, it's just got no place here. There is legislation out there right now, it's on the table, that could possibly change this to age 46, but still, like, why? We'll see if that bill passes. It's just a dumb rule, in my opinion. If you want to know more about ABLE accounts, there's an excellent website from the ABLE National Resource Center that's really informative. It's at ablenrc.org. It answers just about any question that I can imagine anybody would have about ABLEs. You can also compare various state plans on their site, and you get there at ablenrc.org. Florida United is another good site. It's or the Able United site, I mean, which is Florida's Able plan. And again, it's really informative. And if you live in Florida, it's a really good plan. If you live outside of Florida, it's not so much because they don't open it up to outside residents. So it makes it kind of easy to deal with. All right, so that's it on ABLE accounts. Let's go to systematic approaches and how do you like put all this together and have it make sense and keep it current and adapt it. So at our firm, we learned early on that having a systematic approach to financial planning that can change and adapt a plan to the changes that just naturally occur in our family's lives was just absolutely critical to the success of that plan. And financial planning, I mean, it's pretty complicated. It's certainly complicated enough, but add to it a son or daughter or a family member with a disability, and it suddenly becomes so complicated that, well, realistically and in actuality, we just avoid it. So check out these stats I found. This is how much people avoid this. 68% of people with families with special needs, they haven't even done a will. 53% haven't identified even a potential guardian. 72% have not identified who could be a trustee if they were to set up a special needs trust or any kind of trust for that matter. 88% have not done a special needs trust. I mean, oh, and 84% was the last one, haven't done a written letter of intent or a letter just explaining if something were to happen, like where stuff is, so that whoever has to deal with it all can at least find it and see what's going on and understand what the meds are and all that kind of stuff. I mean, can you say avoidance? We have found that having a systematic approach that works starts with an understanding of what the questions are that we're trying to answer. And we at our firm have narrowed it down to basically 5 key sets of questions. The first one is typically the biggest concern that we have and why initially people want to start focusing on their plan. It's, am I making smart decisions with my money? It's often about investing. It's about where to invest, what, when, how to invest, very focused on investing type of questions. But in addition to that, and something that we've have to be concerned about that most people don't, is that making sure that we're positioning ourselves, or at least very aware that we're not jeopardizing any government benefits for our loved ones with a disability through our investing. So the next question that sort of naturally occurs after this is, how do we stretch our money as far as possible? How do we get more out of it? It's the things like decreasing debt costs and increasing cash flows. It's about mitigating taxes. And for our crowd, it's about dealing with retirement for multi-generations. And again, preserving government benefits. That's a theme in every single one of these. We call all of these type of concerns wealth enhancement concerns, and they tend to be the second biggest set of concerns that we have, or that we see our clients have. The next set of questions tend to revolve around transferring our wealth. It's, how do I make sure that my money goes where I want it to go? And how do I do it efficiently and effectively? And how do I keep it equitable? Or what if one kid has a disability and another one doesn't? How do I make sure that I'm taking care of both? And how do we have 2 kids. So how do I make sure my daughter doesn't feel like, well, gosh, what am I, the ugly stepchild? So we always have to keep in mind that we must preserve those government benefits again in any step of our planning process. Wealth protection ends up becoming the next biggest concern. Or how do you protect yourself from lawsuits or risks that maybe we didn't fully realize or understand? And for our families, a very real concern is predators that are out there. It can be as simple as falling for a sales pitch over the phone for something that we don't need, or falling prey to a devastating financial scam. In my son's case, he is so trusting and unsuspecting of people that he's just such easy prey for phone sales pitches for the daily newspaper. I mean, we still get the daily newspaper thrown at the end of our driveway. I mean, who reads that? Nobody, hardly anybody reads that anymore. We do. The last question we hear is, how can I make the world a better place? And it's not going to be on everybody's radar, but for many people, it's going to be important. And in our case, for example, we haven't forgotten in our estate plan how important organizations like NAMI have been to us and to our family and to our communities, and that they need our help. So charitable bequests can be a big difference maker to charity. So seriously, if you have the ability, consider making it formal and putting something in your will or your trust that helps NAMI Miami down the road. And it doesn't have to be a lot. This is one of those areas that really make big differences. So those are the issues that we're dealing with. And remember what I said, that people's lives are constantly changing. You can see how in each of those categories that change is definitely going to occur. So what does a process then look like that's going to address them all regularly in order to catch those changes and the impact that they're going to have on future planning? So here's our process that we use. And we start with a discovery meeting, which is really a wonderful, informative discussion where we find out what is really important to you. What are you trying to achieve? Where are you now? Where do you want to be? What are the gaps? From there, we end up focusing on what's usually that first biggest concern is making smart decisions with our money, which involves investing. We are an investment firm, and so we develop an investment policy for our clients. It's basically a track that we're going to run on and explain how we feel the most efficient way to make that money last as long as possible and to do what it needs to do on your behalf. We end up having a third meeting with our potential clients where we have a mutual commitment meeting where we decide, are we a good fit for you? And are you somebody that we can really help and make a big difference in your life? We have our own professional network team, a series of attorneys, CPAs, insurance professionals who are well-versed in special needs planning, that we consult with on a regular basis about our client plans to help us develop big picture plans on what we should be doing and prioritize what needs to be done first. We meet with our clients 45 days after we initially sign up or when they formally decide that we're their financial planner. And we just found it's a sweet spot. It's just an important meeting to have just to make sure everything's going smoothly and people understand. But this is the difference maker here. It's that regular progress meeting every 6 months. Many clients, like I told you about the client with the annuities, that was about every 6 weeks we were meeting to work on regular progress, prioritizing goals, making sure that we've checked off the highest priority goal, and then move on to the next. And if we're not checking it off, why is that? And what's in the way? What's the obstacle we need to overcome? And figuring out together collaboratively how we're going to do that. And that's our process. So we're pretty much right on schedule. And as promised, I was going to open up to some questions here. So Celia was real nice and sent me a whole bunch of questions that y'all had sent in ahead of time. So I'm reading her email here. What are some special needs trusts do's and don'ts? Ooh, that's a good one. All right. You know what? The first thing pops in my head is don't make a family member a sole trustee. Gosh, I see that all the time, and it's just a huge mistake. It's like it never works out. Do use a corporate trustee, at least as a co-trustee. The problem is that individuals, they have lives. They don't have the time. They don't have the expertise in most cases. They don't have the resources to administrate a trust properly. And in so many cases that I've seen, they have to end up hiring expensive outside managers and administrators and CPAs. And there's no monitoring of them either when it's a family member as the trustee of the special needs trust. There's no requirement that they have to keep detailed records, where a corporate trustee has government monitoring as well as a requirement to keep detailed records of everything. So also on that note, use a directed trustee.
What is a corporate trustee?
A corporate trustee would be an entity that has formed itself for the sole purpose of administrating trusts. I think I can say this out loud. A corporate trustee that works really well in all 50 states and has really well versed in special needs trusts out of Nashville is Cumberland Trust. CumberlandTrust.com or something like that. I'm sure they're easy to find. They have offices in all 50 states. Guardian Trust over in Clearwater has special needs. However, Guardian Trust is not a directed trustee. A directed trustee allows the grantor. Cumberland Trust is a directed trustee, which is why I like them better. But a directed trust or trustee allows the grantor, the person who formed the trust, to use their preferred financial advisor, their preferred advisors, and eliminates the conflict of interest that trustees have who are also managing assets. You know, I always scratch my head like, you got a trustee who's managing the investments at the same time. It's like, you don't see the conflict there. It's just huge, but apparently not for a lot of people. But it's just one of those things that, like, those in the know will tell you, use a directed trustee that doesn't manage the assets as well. Other do's and don'ts. Use an elder law attorney. Gosh, it's just so rare. If you need a referral to an elder law attorney, like I said, Martindale Hubble, or I think it's just martindalenow.com, is a great referral source online. So you can find somebody, you know, close by you, wherever you live. If it's South Florida and you want some awesome names, give me a call. we know some really, really good attorneys. So use an elder law certified attorney. Okay. Next question. What is the latest treatment? It's the latest. Yeah, that's out of our realm. I'd say I'm assuming that's referring to medical treatment. So I'm going to bypass that one. How do you go about estate planning for a mentally ill child? Collaboratively, I would say. It's a team that's doing it. There's really three parts for most people, the three real key parts. There's the parent or guardian, whoever it is. There is the advisor, and then there's the attorney. The advisor is the planner. The attorney and the advisor have to be working together. They have to both be on the same page. Just attorneys, I find, you know, when the advisor is not part of the equation, I find trusts with language on the financial side that is maybe just a little bit too restrictive and can limit what the advisor, the financial advisor, can ultimately do. So it's nice to work with an attorney that understands the financial side as well and is working with an advisor that gets it. Next question, how do I apply for life insurance for a family member who is suffering from a mental illness and drug and alcohol addiction? Can it be done? Do insurance companies allow this? Well, if it's the family member with serious mental illness that we're talking about here that is applying for the insurance, they're uninsurable, unfortunately. I don't know of any insurance companies that will insure anybody who has a schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, is basically on the DSM And anybody who has addiction issues, those are usually declines. Maybe there's somebody out there, but I've not heard of it. Is there a way to shelter money that gets put away to use for care in the future? Is there a way to shelter the money that gets put away to use for care in the future? Well, yeah, I'm sure. Special needs trusts and enable accounts. Those are our two big big tools in the shed. Those are the two big things on that. When do you need a special needs trust? So we pretty much touched on that. Basically, again, it's when SSI or Medicaid are going to be affected by topping out those resource limits when care is needed. And you know what? Even if they never have SSI or a resource limit to contend with, if there's even the slightest chance they might, it's really good to have that third-party special needs trust in existence. It's a great place to put resources, especially if you're, like a life insurance policy that either mom or dad have taken out specifically for this purpose. Because even if they don't need it to qualify for SSI, it's still a good thing. It still has good language in there about, using those resources specifically for that person who has a serious mental illness or a disability. Let's see, what was the next one? My daughter, this is a longer one. My daughter is 19. And one of my greatest concerns is financial planning for her future, considering her mental health needs and expenses. No kidding, I agree. Since she is already an adult, okay, what are the ways, if any, that I can help her manage her money and protect her financially? Well, the thing there is it's a tough one to answer. Can she take care of it herself? Is she competent with her finances on her own? If the answer is no, it's up to you. I mean, you need to start the planning. It's time to take stock in what your resources are, and not just financially, but in who that can help you, who are the family members that can step up, and who are the professionals that you need to sort of put into your team to start focusing on this. And this is an area where being proactive makes all the difference in the world. And two more, is there a prioritized list of what a caregiver with low financial means should do? Is there a prioritized list of what a caregiver with low financial means should do? Okay. Yes, definitely. Number one, apply for SSI or Social Security or SSDI, whichever program you're going for based on your work history. Like Marilyn said, you'll thank me later. Just apply. You'll thank me later. If you get declined, which a lot of people do, go on the website. There is a path that you can take to challenge it. And if it's not working, then you hire an attorney. If you still think you should be qualifying, but you're getting declined. If your doctor wrote good notes, basically is what we've found, and clearly diagnoses the situation, it's those gray diagnoses that have problems. It's the ones that say schizophrenia, boom, it's on the DSM, you're qualified. It's just going to go through. After that, I would say be proactive. Just be proactive and learn everything you can about what's available. Attend NAMI meetings just like this. You guys have a phenomenal clubhouse in Miami, Key Clubhouse. MHA is Mental Health America is a really good resource for stuff. Call your managing entity. They know everybody. It's Thriving Mind in Miami, or I don't know if it's Thriving Mind or Thriving Minds. They're not the provider, but they know all the providers and they will talk to you. Subscribe to, write this one down. It's FLMHAC. It stands for Florida Mental Health Advocacy Coalition.org. Apply for alerts from them. That's a shameless plug. That's my wife's organization. But they're doing amazing things with changing legislation in the state of Florida, and being keyed into what's changing will key you into potential benefits that you might miss otherwise. and just get involved. This is not an area that where you can sit back and good things will happen by themselves. It won't. It won't. You have to be proactive. Last question here. Do you or does your office offer a second opinion? Well, that's pretty cool. And what does that cost? The answer is yeah, absolutely. We will offer a second opinion that is basically the first 2 steps in our process. And as far as the cost goes, we've found that charging a fee for that, for basically what at that point is just our opinion, doesn't really set very well with us. So it's free. You know, for those that are going to end up needing our planning services down the road and have issues that we can help them with in a positive way, then we'll set up a more formal arrangement so that we get paid. But for quite a few people, we really end up just pointing them in the direction that they need to go, give them some sage, wise advice on what they might want to consider doing next. And it costs them nothing. And so it's, I think, one of those few cases in life where you actually get something of value without having to pay for it, except of course your time. All right, so I've got time for one quick story and then we'll wrap this up. So I love sailing. Anybody who knows me knows that it's like one of my passions outside of this. So I need to share my screen because I got a cool thing I want to show you.
Alan, I just want to alert you that we do have Frank who has a question. So after your story, if you want to do it before, it's really up to you. You want to take the question or you want to wait?
Well, I'm all excited about. All right, no, let's go ahead, Frank. Let's hear it.
Okay, well, it was covered the waterfront. I appreciate that. And I heard mostly things about government programs and money and trusts and money. And basically we heard all kinds of things about money. And that's great, because that has to be there. But I didn't hear, and maybe that's not your specialty, I don't know, but how do you arrange that whoever it is that's looking after the person, once you're gone from this earth, how do you find an organization or an individual who can do the job that you're now doing? Then you will not be able to do. And you could leave a mountain of money, but if there's nobody there to help that person when they hit their crisis, or, you know what I'm saying? I don't think I need to say more. How do you get the right organization or person? If you pick a person, they can die. If you pick, you know what I'm saying here?
It's got to be sustainable, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's going to be different answers for everybody. And for, unfortunately, an embarrassing amount of people, there is no good answer that ends up coming up. It's just, it's really hard. And we end up being dependent, which is why my better half works entirely on the legislative side. We are dependent on the state for a lot of our folks, and we just have to have.
War to the state.
Yeah, I mean that is the last line of defense that we've got. But if you on our side, we are this is a financial planning talk, and so that the focus is on financial planning. And for the fortunate few that have the resources to deal with it, the answer there ends up being working with the key player is that trustee of the trust, which is why we really shy away from the family member as sole trustee. We don't mind having the family member as a co-trustee and getting the family input in there and making sure there's a good line of potential successor trustees listed in the document. But the corporate trustee, I think, is just absolutely critical on that.
And they have a plan for succession, and if their trustee individual leaves or someone else jumps in and that kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So you want to work with a large organization that has a process and a system, just like we do, for example, where there's just not a planner here. If what if your planner is gone or suddenly leaves this earth? You need that to know that there's sustainability there in succession. So yes, absolutely. Okay.
Alan, we have one
Thank
question
you.
also from Monty. And I have one question too, but Monty,
Sure.
go ahead.
Yeah, Alan, I'm a CPA. I've been dealing in this industry for 50 years. I really do appreciate what you said tonight because it totally, you hit some really key points in terms of watch out for life insurance people and the difference between a real financial planner. I definitely would like to get from you later on the list of the corporate trustees that you mentioned before. I'll reach out to you separately on that. But there is, and one of the other things I have to tell you that you said was really impactful is that you might be planning for retirement for more than just 2 people. And we have a lot of younger folks that are on here. I can recognize the names from our family support groups and our other programs. And so that's something that you've given us some tools to start that process early. They're knowing that that might mean a little bit of extra work or a little bit of extra savings put aside. So I just want to just give you those comments there. And the last thing that I want to say is that what Frank brought up in terms of those who can't afford that, maybe we can talk about that some more in another session in terms of what we can do to try to help most of the people, not just the select few who do have the finances. But thank you so much for your talk tonight.
Sure. Well, thank you. And I really thought that was a great question that someone had asked earlier about, that prioritized list of, what could a caregiver of low financial means do? And, honestly, and I've thought about this one a lot, is what else can you do other than just be proactive and learn as much as you possibly can about this world and how it's changing, because it's changing fast. I mean, when my son had his first crisis 12, 13 years ago now, and now it's like night and day. It's completely a different landscape, and it's continuing to change. There's a head of steam on this thing right now, and we need more people getting more involved. But paying attention to what's happening on the legislative front, I think, is a key component, because that's where you're going to first hear about the law changes that will impact us and force resources and force parity with insurance programs and things like that will level the playing field a little bit. Right? Yeah. Good point. Thank you for those words. Did you have was there another one you said, Celia?
Yeah, yes, actually we got one on the chat. So are there financial planners or attorneys that perhaps do pro bono or maybe work on sliding scales? I know that the universities definitely have clinics that people might be able to participate in. And I think there are also sliding scales, but I think you would need to contact, oh my goodness, the referral service.
I would hope that there are. I don't know any of them. And by all means, if somebody knows of anybody that is, that would do that. I don't want to say all the guys I know are sharks, but they're nice people. They really are. But unfortunately, it's not an inexpensive proposition to set up a special needs trust, because it is a really sort of specialized part of the law. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's okay. So my question is, when you're setting up one of these trusts, do you have to be the guardian? Or could it be that you have a child who is an adult child who's still basically independent, but you're concerned because their, volatility with relapses or their symptoms? So do you legally have to be the guardian for when you're setting up one of these?
No, you don't. So let's just take your basic revocable trust that, sort of a lot of folks have, right? And the person who sets it up is the grantor, right? So if I'm setting up a revocable trust, and the ultimate goal of the trust is to take care of my kids and pass on my assets to my kids, all right? So it's real simple. I'm the grantor of the trust. I can choose to elect myself as being the trustee of the trust as well, or I can make somebody else the trustee. So So I could be both the grantor and the trustee, but then the beneficiary of the trust would be my kids, for example, in that example. So let's say my kids don't have, a qualifying disability for SSI or anything. I'm not overly concerned about them, getting disqualified for SSI, but it might happen. I don't know. So I'm talking to my attorney about that, and she might say, well, you might want to put a testamentary special needs trust into your trust. In other words, language in your regular revocable trust that says, in the event that my son or daughter is receiving Social Security benefits and would be disqualified by the receipt of these funds or the receipt of these assets, then we will establish a special needs trust on their behalf. And that's called a testamentary trust. So that's definitely a discussion with your attorney who's going to help you with your estate planning and or your financial planner that should be well versed in that as well.
Alan, I do have an answer for the pro bono question.
Oh,
So
awesome.
Perhaps there should be the certified financial planners, when they retire, will have something to do by going into NAMI offices and fielding those questions. They can't give legal advice. They can give practical advice and use a lot of the wisdom and what they've seen over the years. And I know you're about 30 years away from retirement.
Oh,
I think that you would be a great candidate, but maybe you can spread the word around, and maybe even some CPAs who have worked in this field as well, because we need that help at NAMI. People are just dying for this information.
That's a great idea. Yes, that's a great idea. See what happens when people get together. Cool. All right. Can I tell my story yet, or you got any more?
No, you're free to tell us your story.
All right. I love sailing, as I was saying. Actually, we're going to be going there in just a few weeks. I can't wait. It's my favorite place in the world. That's the British Virgin Islands. And the problem, though, is that I grew up in Madison, Wisconsin, and there's just not a whole lot of opportunities to learn to sail in Madison, Wisconsin. There are lakes, but it's not the same. So it wasn't until Gail and I had moved to South Florida back in our mid-20s, and we're a young married couple, and that's when we learned how to sail. And I remember our first little tiny sailboat. I mean, the thing was a mess, but it taught us a lot, and we learned a lot from it. And then I got into sailing catamarans off of the causeway. If you've ever been on Rickenbacker Causeway there, you see all the people with catamarans. I used to be one of those guys. But then one day, Gail got me a birthday present that was the best possible present she could have ever come up with. She got me these sailing lessons with this wonderful sailor, and his name is Kai, who owned a sailing club out of Matson Hammock Park down there. And it was called Castle Harbor, if any of you were around. Now, it was Kai that taught me how to sail, like how to really sail. He taught me how to appreciate some of the finer points of sailing and how to really just love the sport and the idea of sailing. So the thing about Kai is that he could explain things to me, they were so simple. He could explain things in a way that were clear and they were obvious and they were easy to understand. And he made me want to learn more about sailing. And today, pat myself on the back, I'm a pretty good sailor, and I owe a lot of it to Kai for helping me sort of fuel that passion. And so this is what I know to be true, that whatever it is in life, that when you're working with somebody like a Kai who's passionate about their work and knows it so well that they can explain it to you in terms that you can understand, and who truly wants to help you in reaching your most important goals, then just good things are going to happen. So let me end on this. One of our personal biggest goals this past 10 years or so has been to get our son to a place where he can really start enjoying his life. And it's been a work in progress and probably will remain so for a long time. And I know I've mentioned him a lot in this talk, so I wanted to show you this. So just in the last couple of years, we, one second here, gotta move this. Just in the last couple of years, we have taken his passion along with our passion, and we kind of put them together. And this is him, not crewing a sailboat, but actually skippering a sailboat on one of our BVI trips. And just yesterday, he was saying to me that he can't wait, for that next BVI trip. And a smile like that is just something you don't see very often in our world. So I just wanted to share that with you. There goes my lights again for effect. Hang on a second. There we go. So listen, you've been a wonderful audience tonight, and I really appreciated these awesome questions you guys have come up with. And I hope I've helped you in some small way. So unless there's any other questions, I am out of material.
Thank you so much, Alan. This was wonderful. And it's great to see the picture of your son enjoying a passion that you have, something that you can share. So thank you so much for spending this time and giving us such valuable information and at least, pointing us in the right direction so that we can begin to plan and take some action for not only for our future, but for that of our loved ones. So thank you so much for joining us. And thank you for everybody who came. I will be putting together some notes. I wrote down copious notes on some of the resources that Alan provided us graciously. So I will be sharing them with everyone. So thank you very much for all of you that came.
Awesome.
Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you and good night.
Have a
Thank
good
you.
night,
Thank you
everyone.
all.
Good night,
Thank you.
everybody.
Good night.